Sherry blinked a few times, feeling her heart speed up and her throat close up. Deep down, she didn't think he would really take off his mask. Deep down, she thought that she was wrong. He wasn't as who she thought he was. It was just a big coincidence that she would just come off as awkward, maybe create a bit of an uncomfortable mood, but nothing more. However, she couldn't hold back the tears that started streaming down her face. She felt a little breathless, and her chest was buried and filled, confused with mixed feelings. She didn't even know whether to hug him or slap him across the face. She didn't know whether to cry over the years of repressed feelings right there or ran out of room as possible, never wanting to look at that face that occupied many of her dreams. His blonde hair, a little longer than she remembered, still in the same style, covered his right eye almost completely, and now was just the nape of his neck. It had been a while since he had cut it. His face was still beautiful, more handsome than she thought he'd be. She had first seen him when she'd thought he was some kind of model. As it turns out, he had gotten better with his time. His skin was now marked with a few scars, one below his left eye, another at the side of his forehead, marks that didn't make much features any less attractive. With all things considered, he didn't seem to have changed that much. But what certainly changed during that time were his eyes. That blue she remembered so fiery, so alive and much comfortable warmth, no longer felt the same. They were cold as ice, dull, without even a trace of warmth, as if it was just another empty shell. So different. His features, even they showed the slightest hint of nervousness at the moment, were still too cold to compare to years ago. Sherry opened and closed her mouth a few times. She didn't know exactly what to say. She didn't know if she should say anything, although she had so much of which she wanted to scream. All those nights she slept with Claire for fear of sleeping alone, feeling exposed for not having him there, for having no idea where he'd gone. All those times she asked to sleep with Chris, and he hadn't given her that feeling of insecurity where he should have. All those times she cried in hiding so as to not upset Claire or Chris. All those times she had seen Claire do the same. Ghost, for his part, was in his situation. He didn't know exactly what they'd been through. Only they wandered a long time or on their own, until he finally served that email to Chris, but he was sure that he hadn't been easy. There was no way. He had been there to help them, to be there for them. Why? The first question she always had wanted to ask him, if she ever wanted the chance to meet him again. What happened to you? Why did you? She opened her mouth, but couldn't finish her question. Ghost continued to stare at her for some time, thinking about what to say. After a few years of training, he had stopped thinking about what he would say to them if he ever met them again. The day never seemed to come. More and more, and hope in his chest disappeared, and discipline, duty, cruelty concealed its feelings. He felt lost. He regretted taking off his mask. It was so easy for him to simply ignore her, just easy to turn around and walk out of the room. So easy to kick her out. So why? Feelings. He had gone so long without any human reactions that he had forgotten the meaning of the word, forgotten what his body was capable of expressing. Something other than pain. For your safety, I can't say, he said, and Sherry's body shivered. His voice, now not muffled by the mask, was so lifeless, like a robot. You can't say? Don't you think you owe us an explanation? Answers? She asked, trying to keep her best staring at her, making Sherry wipe tears from her face with her angry hands. Do you know so much what we've been through? Do you know how long we walked alone? She raised her voice, pushing Ghost by the shoulder. How much we worried about you? She pushed him again. Ghost took a step back, not from the force but from the pressure. He felt that he deserved it. How much we've cried not knowing we were gone? She pushed him again. How much we wish you were here with us? Again. Do you know how many times we've woken up crying in the middle of the night? Again. Ghost felt his back being thrown against the wall, Sherry's punches to his chest, and he just let her. He didn't react. She couldn't get it off her chest. He deserved that guilt. Sherry stared deep down in his eyes, waiting for an answer, which never came. That empty look broke her heart. and the tears flowed harder. She began to gasp at the lower part of their head, mentally scolding herself for crying like a child in front of him. Ghost opened his mouth slightly, his eyes widening a little. He hated seeing her like this, hated knowing that he was the cause of her suffering. He never wanted that. He just wanted what's best for them. A good life, away from all the shit, where they would have to suffer again. "Don't cry for me, Redfield. I don't deserve it," he said, trying to keep his tone professional as possible, but failing. Sherry continued to cry for some time, until she let out a nasal laugh, choked with tears in her eyes, and the tip of her nose was red. Her cheeks were a little swollen. For some time this hurt Ghost's heart. He didn't know how to react. It was as if he was experiencing a human for the first time. "I may have deserved your anger, but not your tears," he said again. Sherry rested her hands on his chest, feeling the scars underneath the clothes. There were so many that just filled her with more questions. "I'm not angry with you," she said, taking him by surprise. "Frustrated, nervous, maybe a little sad, worried, but not angry." Well, he certainly didn't expect that. "Why can't you tell?" she asked. Ghost took a deep breath. Well, technically he could. "Because it doesn't matter," he replied. Sherry wiped away tears from her trembling hands, staring at Ghost with an arched eyebrow. "Are you trying to convince me or yourself?" she asked, and Ghost looked away. Admittedly, this wasn't the best answer. "I couldn't leave because I wanted to, if that's what you think," he said, shortly afterwards. Sherry shook her head. "Yeah, we kind of knew. It wouldn't have made sense for you to risk your life like that, to save the lives of only to leave later," she said. Her voice sounded a little hoarse, a little lower than why. He then rested his head on the wall. Would it matter if he told? What difference would it make if he hadn't? Couldn't that cause any consequences in the future? Maybe, maybe not. In the end, he sighed as his legs could no longer support his body. He didn't feel weak, but at the same time, he didn't feel as if he could stand up. Emotions, amazing how so silly, could bring them down easily. Sherry followed him to the ground, still keeping her hands on his chest. Once again, Ghost shook his head. Again was still ignoring the agent's side, but that's what worried him. He couldn't be weak now. He couldn't develop any weakness. Feelings were worryingly, and they have caused damage. A weakness, a distraction he could not have. The right decision would have been to simply stop there, turn around and leave the room as possible, ignoring the girl's advances. It was so easy, but so difficult. "You don't remember that day I disappeared when you were found by this group? William's group?" he began, and Sherry blinked a few times. "You were hit with some kind of medical tranquilizer. That's why you don't remember anything." He dropped on one of his arms on his knee, listening to his agent's side scream. Fuck it. Now he would go all the way. They knew about us. They knew we were raccoon survivors. He noticed the confusion in the girl's eyes. They received a recording from one of the agents they had. He was responsible for documenting the virus and its mutations. He had a recording from everything. From the police station, the parking lot, the sewer, the laboratory. He sighed. They wanted to hire me to work with them. They wanted me to become an agent. So basically that's what I am today. And you accepted it? Well, considering what you're like, it's an obvious decision. But why hit me and Claire with tranquilizers? Sherry asked. Ghost cracked the bones in his neck. Because you're still infected. Sherry's eyes widened slightly in surprise, her mouth ajar. She looked to be surprised but still the same. But at the same time she didn't seem that infected. Claire and I had some side effects from the virus, but we're no longer infected. You took the antidote yourself, she had argued, and Ghost shook his head. Yes, but you're still infected. The antidote only made the virus inherent, unable to act on bodies, but it's still there. As much as small levels can practically be impossible for you to suffer any reaction. Sherry lowered her head slightly, staring at the floor. So is there a chance of me or Claire becoming immortal monsters? She asked. Of course not. The virus has become part of you. It's who you are, hence your regeneration. Sherry shook her head. Well, that explains it, she said, sighing and looking at him, waiting for him to continue. William created this organization with one motive in mind: to exterminate all viruses from the face of the earth, anything related to bioterrorism, to eliminate all organizations of bioterrorists, anything that included both of you. Sherry's eyes widened. What? I made a deal. I would join their organization, I would be their soldier, complete their training and follow their orders without a second thought. In return, all of the data that two of you would be erased. They would protect you, make sure no one came after you, and you would be safe. Sherry blinked one more time and her eyes staring up into ghosts. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. What could she say? All those scars, unimaginable things he'd do, what he had become, it was because of them. Her heart was beating so hard that it made it sound like drums in her chest. Leon! He shook his head and raised his hand in front of his body, signaling her to stop. He knew that he would see it in her eyes. I made a choice, and I had reasons for making it. I don't feel bad, don't feel guilty, but there's no point, Sherry snorted. It doesn't? You've wasted a whole life, Leon. He held her hands as he stood up, helping her do the same, both of them maintaining eye contact, trying to ignore the heat of physical contact. Maybe, but you and Claire have won the chance of a normal life. That young cop wouldn't think twice before trading his life for yours, he said, letting go of the girl's arms, even though his insides screamed against it, and walked towards the table, glancing at the screen in front of him. Hunk was seeking through the metal at that idea of the roof of the place. Just below his target, Alex Wesker looking nervous and agitated as she tried bringing her equipment back to life. What about the agent now? Sherry asked, approaching at a slow pace, standing right next to him. Don't you want a normal life? He seemed to think for a while, his eyes unfocused as Hunk shot Alex, descending her to the ground shortly afterwards in a great leap. A normal life? He'd never stopped to think about it since becoming an agent. I'm no longer suited to a normal life, Redfield. I am what I am. What I've become. I was created to fight a war, not to live in peace, he said, Ed, leaning on the table as he watched Alex's body wavering on the floor, and even her getting up with bullet holes all over her body. She moved quickly, but her veins and skin becoming darker and darker, thanks to the little poison in those bullets. Is that what you want? To live the rest of your life fighting? Sherry asked, putting a hand on his shoulder. She almost didn't recognize him. If it means putting an end to all this shit and creating a better life, not just for you and Claire, but for the world, yes, he replied. Sherry sighed with some regret. Really? Back on the island you told me that you were going to go after all those corrupt people for killing Wesker. You are going to take down Umbrella and the black market customers, your own government, everything? In all the midst of your plans, in the midst of all your missions, have you ever stopped to think about the after? His serious voice made a ghost lower his head. He swallowed some saliva and his mind was flooded with thoughts. His goal was to end everything related to bioterrorism, and that was that. He didn't have to waste time thinking about nonsense like afterwards. It only clouded his thoughts, his focus on the missions. Sherry lowered her head in silence. Look, Leon. Don't call me by that name, he interrupted her. His voice still low, but feels somewhat cold. He's dead. I'm Ghost now, or call me Agent if you like. Hearing that made her sad. She didn't even know what kind of training he had, but considering that he had said that the airport, it was probably inhuman. Or maybe it's because of the constant missions he was forced to do. It's hard to believe that you're the same cop who saved me. You seem so empty, as if you accepted your life to be summed up in just one thing, to hell with the rest, she said, running a hand through her hair in frustration. I'm a soldier. What matters is accomplishing the mission. I don't have time, let alone luxury of self-preservation, he said, crossing his arms and watched a Hunk fight Alex. The woman looked slower and slower, and weaker. The poison was working its way through her body. It was only a matter of time before she died. As he watched, he could feel the girl's incredulous gaze on him. He didn't even know why she was so surprised. Soldier created to his duty. If his death was necessary for that purpose, then so be it. Really? Is that what you think? Sherry asked, indignant. Death can have me when the time comes. If I die performing a mission, Hunk will be ready to take over. The same otherwise. Sherry sighed. Ghost, this is no way to live. It's not fair that I'm living my dream while you're out there, being treated like a pawn. He snorted in a nasal laugh and glared at her. Does it bother you that what I think of life? I could worry about the life of the man who saved me, she asked back. Ghost lowered his gaze. If it bother you so much, Redfield. Sherry. Call me Sherry, she interrupted him, and he turned to the girl. If it bothers you so much, Sherry, you could do something to make me happy, he began, putting his mask back on his face. The conversation soon had to end as possible, and he didn't know how long he would go on like this without feeling the girl's total mercy. Live your life, travel with your friends, meet new people, have fun, be happy, enjoy the opportunity that the rookie cop has given you. Enjoy it well, and I promise that I'll do my best to keep it that way. She stared into his eyes, his face now covered by that damn mask. Seeing him like that, so redesigned by his own death, it's so obvious the pleasures in real life. It was one of the worst fates that would befall on the man who had done so much to save her. She swallowed some saliva, feeling her throat begin to close up. She didn't feel like she could carry on the conversation. It was too much information, too many mixed feelings, so she just chose to leave. Ghost turned in the screen again, watching Hunk plunge the machete into Alex's neck, watching him decapitate the woman and burn her body as a guarantee that she would stay down, while hearing the girl's footsteps moving away. Don't tell Claire, he said loudly. Shortly after Sherry opened the door, the girl turned around staring at his back. She deserves to know as much as I do. She doesn't need to know, especially not now. Sherry clucked her tongue in mild irritation. She suffered a lot because of your disappearance. You don't see her. I had to stand by her side whenever she had a panic attack, or I had to watch her quietly when she pretended that everything was fine. He turned around, still with his arms crossed. All the more reason better not to know. It's better that she thinks that cop is dead. That way she can enjoy her life more. Sherry reached for the door handle. She lost a lot of people, a lot of friends. It took her a long time to get better, even longer to open her heart. That monster you killed, it was her boyfriend. It was going to take her a long time to get better, and even longer to open her heart again, if she manages to get better this time. Do you ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, that sweet officer would show up one more time and help her with that? Sherry closed the door, leaving Ghost trapped in his own thoughts. He kept his gaze fixed on the girl. Slowly he lowered his head, thoughtful. He couldn't let Leon come back once more. He was dead and buried. He had to be. But deep down he felt sensations that he thought he buried with that cop. You're getting weak. What a disappointment. Claire grunted slightly as she woke up. She felt her body a little numb, but she didn't feel any pain, which was something. She kept her eyes closed for a while feeling her senses normalize. She was in bed that was much clearer, a hospital bed by the smells of it. There was someone sitting next to the bed, probably feigning sleep due to the calm rhythmic beating. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking a few times until she got used to the brightness. She looked around, recognizing the medical wing of the BSAA. Next to her was Chris, sitting in the chair what rather looked uncomfortable, his eyes crossed and arms crossed and eyes closed. The only thing he knew he was awake because his eyes were blinking. She grunted uncomfortably as she felt her throat dry. Her mind quickly reminded her of the events on the island. She grimaced, grunting once more. She definitely didn't want to think about that shit right now. With luck, maybe never again. Claire! Oh good, you woke up earlier than the doctor said, his voice said with force. Then he looked tired. He certainly hadn't slept since he arrived. Typical Redfield behavior. She'd smile if she didn't felt like shit. You're beat, she tried to joke, and Chris let out a nasal laugh, leaning on his thigh. His face was still bandaged, and as his forearm. She suspected that he would be in bed by now. You're the one in the hospital bed, Chris said, and Claire looked at his body. Her leg and torso were bandaged, but she didn't feel any pain. What happened? She asked, accepting the glass of water that Chris held out for her. The mixture you drank knocked you out, but we managed to get you off the island without too much trouble. Clara sighed and closed her eyes. Yeah, he kind of said something like that. Chris shook his head. Yeah, and he also said he wanted to go after Alex. Claire turned to face him, only to find her brother with the typical serious expression when he was worried or about to scold her. I'll spare us both the scolding. I just thank him for not helping you with this madness. Claire clucked her tongue. At the thought she didn't feel anger, distress or sadness, but at the moment on the island she was angry. She wanted to badly go after Alex and blow her head off with a shotgun. Now she realized it wasn't exactly a good idea. That's good, but I'm not really in the mood to be grounded right now. But we'll talk about it. I'm sending you my things to my place. Sherry's too. You'll both be in my line of sight from now on. I don't want to hear any complaints, he said, authoritatively, which resulted in a sincere smile from the woman. Same old Chris. Yeah, I kinda expected that. What happened to Alex? She's dead. Ghost came in and told me a few minutes ago. Hand me photos of her decapitated, Chris said, placing a tablet on Claire's stomach, who took the object and looked with the empty eyes at the woman's decapitated and burnt body. The island's been destroyed. They did a sweep of the area and found none of the infected managed to escape. It's all behind us now. It was great news too. Too bad she couldn't feel anything from it. She just wanted to put the tablet down again and rested her head on the pillow, staring at the white ceiling. Why does this shit keep happening? She asked to no one in particular, thinking to herself out loud. What's in it for her? All those people, all those deaths? For what? That all work could only be killed by masked agents. I don't know what her plans were, but I'm glad it didn't come for the light. There's no point in thinking what it could have been, that what wasn't. In the end, she paid for what she did, and I think we can only be grateful that she won't be able to kill anyone anymore, Chris said, and Claire swallowed some saliva. She would never forget the family she killed, like her little sin, her little own demon that would occupy her thoughts. Her dreams take over her life in the future. Yeah, maybe, she said, feeling Chris stare at her for a while, seeming like he wanted to say something but held back. Good, she didn't want to be comforted at the moment. Nothing in the world can do that. Well, now that you're awake, I'm going to get some sleep, he said, taking the tablet back. The doctor said you'll be limping for a while, but all things considered, it's almost a miracle that your leg is still in one piece. Rest up and we'll talk later. Chris shook her head and thanked him and walked away towards the door. Before he left, he turned around to his now sympathetic eyes and looked at her lightly. Things will get better, Claire. One day they will. That's all he said before they left the room. Claire sighed once more as she stared at the white ceiling. Things were going to get better, but not fast enough. She no longer believed that the world would ever be at peace. She doubted it would ever end. With each passing day, that hope seemed to be more and more futile. She stayed there for another hour, until she finally decided to get up. She couldn't bear to lie there with nothing but her thoughts. She didn't want to think of Neil. She didn't want to think about Alex. She didn't want to think about that island. Nothing. She looked down at her hospital clothes and ran a hand through her hair. She hated hospitals. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been in one. The woman left the room and looked around. It was still dark and the corridors were empty, except for a few nurses. She turned and walked calmly down the empty corridor, ignoring the distant whispers from the occasional grunts as she reached the canteen. There she found Parker leaning against the wall next to a cabinet, waiting for his food to be ready. Their eyes entered the room. "Ah, little Redfield, good to see you're all right," he said amiably, and Claire smiled politely. He also looked a bit tired, but better than Chris. "Hey, Parker. Thanks for going with Chris, you know. Thanks for coming to my rescue," she thanked him, stopping next to the table in the center of the room. Parker just waved his hand. "Nah, no need to thank me. You needed help. I needed help. Simple as that," he said, and smiled slightly grateful that people like him still existed. She walked over to the cabinet and grabbed the free protein bars. She didn't feel like cooking anything, much less she did feel like comfortable doing it in the BSAA, but maybe when she got home. "What are you still doing up? It's almost 3 in the morning, she asked, taking a generous bite of her first protein bar. "I was cleaning my guns and getting some more ammo. I thought too I'd make a quick target practice with some more targets. That horde really nearly screwed us," Parker said, picking up his food and sitting down with the table after. Horde? Claire asked, and Parker looked at her with slightly wide eyes. Oh, Chris didn't tell you, didn't he? Well, shit, don't tell him I told you. Let's just say Alex didn't want us to get off easily, sent a small army after us, Parker explained, and Claire sighed. Of course he wouldn't say. Well, sorry for being a dead weight then. Oh, come on, Claire, it's not like that. We managed to get you out. Nobody died, so in the end it worked out. As far as it went, he said, and Claire shook her head. It still wasn't enough. But I'll tell you that Agent Ghost, I've never seen anyone like him. Fuck, it was everything by those infected would do. It was carnage, Parker said, and Claire blinked a few times, curious. What's his fighting style? She asked. He didn't really move in the fluid way. She didn't see much of him, but it was admirable, and perhaps a little stupid for him to run head first into biological weapons. No idea, but it seems to be a mixture of several different styles. I can't tell, but whatever it was, it felt like watching a monster kill monsters, Parker said, concentrating on his own food again. Claire threw down the wrapper of the 2 protein bars she already ate and opened the third thoughtfully. A monster killing monsters, huh? Well, it's a good thing he's on our side then, Claire said, throwing the last package in the trash. Thanks again, Parker. I'm going to have to take a walk before I go back to my room. No problem, Redfield. Take care, Parker said, waving his hand towards Claire, who soon came out of the canteen. She took a deep breath and felt the icy air on her skin, which had made her halfway through the corridors, with no apparent direction, just wanting to walk, distract herself a little, not to let her mind slowly go down too much. The next thing she knew, she found herself walking towards a private training ground. The place was used by Chris and his team, only authorized by members to enter it. She smiled as she passed in front of it, although the area was exclusive use for Chris and his team. He rarely used it, much for preparing to do his training other than the soldiers. And as she walked, she heard someone's grunts, followed by the same sounds of movement. Something cutting through the air. Someone was training. This made the woman arch an eyebrow curiously. Chris was asleep. Most likely Jill is too. Not to mention the fact that she doesn't like to train in the early hours in the morning. Parker couldn't be. She had just talked to him. Maybe Sherry? No steps were too heavy to be hers. The woman turned around and put her finger in the scanner, passing through the turnstile soon after. The lights were soon on, showing the empty place, all the equipment with no one using it. To her right was a wall leading to a small training ground, with sandbags scattered around, and a fighting rig with a few other hand-to-hand combat objects. She walked towards the training ground, and as soon as she got close, her eyes focused on the masked man in front of her. Ghost was attacking the air with his knife in hand. He was wearing a set of black military training clothes and stood there in the center of a field, spinning and piercing the air with his silver combat knife. She stopped and turned to the wall, watching him. Parker was right. He moved in a very unusual way, but at the same time she felt that it was uncertain the way. It was so fluid. His body moved with agility and flexibility that she could see in a dance performance, but not in the battlefield. He pierced and spun the knife in the air with extreme skill. It was safe to say that the mastery of that blade, he wielded it as if it was second nature. As she watched him, she heard some light footsteps approaching beside her. She turned and was greeted by a hug from the blonde figure. Gosh, Claire, thank God you're all right. She turned to the girl's hug, stroking her hair with a certain affection. You'll need to get more to get rid of me, brat, she joked, her voice slightly muffled, and Sherry let out a nasal laugh. You owe me one. Because of you, I'm going to have to move in with Chris, she joked, and Claire shook her head. Put it on my list, she said, and soon after they turned their attention to the agent's training nearby. Chris let him use the gym? Claire asked, surprised to see him here. Actually, I kinda did, Claire arched an eyebrow. But I asked him before, so I guess it's okay, Sherry explained, and the two of them watched him jump, spin his body while in the air, and try to spin the knife along with it, changing his stance immediately after attacking without even touching the ground. Amazing, isn't it? He moves like a comic book character, Sherry said, breaking the silence. It's like Parker said, it's a mixture of different fighting styles. I've never seen anything like this. I can't even tell one style from another, Claire said, as Sherry nodded in agreement. He made a unique style, truth to be told. I wanted him to use his gym in hopes that he would teach me a thing or two, she said, crossing her arms and leaning against the wall. Nothing better to do than to follow a professional, eh? Claire let out a nasal laugh. Huh? He's so kind of a pro at killing bioweapons. I never thought anything like that would become of it, she said, putting her hands on her back and also leaning against the wall. Well, technically, yes, Sherry said, sighing. I know this question sucks, but how are you? How are you really? Claire lowered her head. Sherry was usually the one to ask her to share the deepest secrets with, but at the moment she didn't feel too up to it. Her hands were stained with innocent blood, and she felt like she was going to suffer for it. Her boyfriend had turned out to be an asshole who sold them out for power, and she cried for it. At the moment she felt so lost. I feel like shit. Honestly, I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I really don't want to, really. Sherry stared at her, but then nodded. I understand. She all could see in Claire's eyes she was in pain. Something much worse than she had thought would happen on the island. When that time was right, the woman would open up to her. You're up sooner than I thought. The two looked around, watching Ghost approach with his knife in stealth. They hadn't even noticed that he started to approach. Good to see you're okay, Redfield. Claire laughed in mild disdain. Well, that was the last thing she was feeling at the moment. Well, I wish I felt that way, she replied, her voice slightly hoarse. Mental wounds, I see. You'll be fine. You'll be seen like the kind of person who gets used to it and gets stronger. Claire looked away and ran her tongue over her teeth. Well, that was the thing. She didn't want to be strong. She didn't want to simply put a confident smile and carried on with the inflated chest. She wanted a hug, a lap to cry on, someone to listen to her, or just keep her company. That was all she wanted. But she wouldn't. She wouldn't ask Chris, Jill, or Sherry, no matter how close they were, simply because it wasn't her style. She had no reputation to maintain. Redfield pride. Always that fucking Redfield pride. She cried a lot years ago, and even then she couldn't ask for help. She didn't like it, although she thought her brother or Sherry would see her as weak. And before she knew it, she had a bit of a reputation. Sometimes, rarely, she would want to forget that name, so for a brief very moments. I hope you're right. I'm going back to bed. If Chris finds out I've been up all night, I'll never hear the end of it, Sherry. Ghost, she said, waving to both of them before turning towards the gym exit, leaving the both of them standing there watching her walk away. Ghost suppressed a sigh and looked into the woman's eyes. They were cold, almost like his own. He shook his head slightly and looked at Sherry, meeting the girl's serious gaze. Don't forget what I said. There's still time. That was all she said, before heading for the exit as well. Ghost stared at the girl's back for a few moments, the depths of her being considering that option. Unlikely that was what he wanted to convince himself. Shaking his head, he walked towards the bar in front of him. Perhaps a little weightlifting would help him relieve the stress.